The term democracy is ubiquitous. You can't go 10 minutes reading a newspaper without encountering the word in some context or other. It's also a controversial term. Take the current situation in Catalonia, where protests have been taking place over the decision by the Spanish Supreme Court to sentence leaders of the separatist movement to prison. Important actors on both sides of the conflict refer to democracy as a justification for their actions. Catalan protesters talk about the right to self-determination and freedom of expression. Supporters of the Spanish state refer to respecting the rule of law, the democratic constitution, and non-violent democratic procedures. A similar tension exists right now in America, where supporters of President Donald Trump see him as a man of the people, elected by the people to give voice to the concerns of everyday men and women and to attack the corrupt elite establishment. His opponents see him as a threat to the very existence of democracy, a mafia-style strongman with no respect for the rule of law, no tolerance of opposition, and a violator of the basic norms which make democracy possible. The fact that actors from completely opposing sides of a political conflict came to represent true democracy is revealing, and it suggests that we need to take a step back and look at the meaning of the term. Here, it's helpful to turn to political science, and in particular, Robert Dahl, a famous political scientist, who defined democracy based on two distinct criteria. One which we'll call the participation or accountability dimension, and the second which we'll call the political pluralism dimension. Importantly, accountability and pluralism are not the same thing. Countries have accountable government when everyday citizens have the capacity to participate actively in the political process and when that process is responsive to their needs and desires. On the other hand, government is pluralistic when competition over political office is free and open to a wide variety of competing interest groups, rather than being concentrated in the hands of a monarch, a personalist leader, or a single political party. To see that accountability and pluralism are distinct concepts, consider the political history of the United Kingdom. Ever since drafting of the Magna Carta in 1215 AD, the UK has seen a steady rise in the practice of political pluralism, with the monarchy gradually restricted and power increasingly in the hands of Parliament, where factions, interest groups, and political parties compete for power. However, despite this steady rise in pluralism, up until the middle of the 19th century, only a tiny number of aristocrats and property owners could actually participate in politics. The right to vote was only slowly expanded to a greater portion of the male population over the course of the second half of the 19th century, and it wasn't until 1928 that all women were given the right to vote. Thus, while England began developing pluralistic institutions way back in the 13th century, it only became a participatory democracy much later. Now, the 20th century witnessed a steady increase in the number of countries globally that combined high levels of political pluralism and high levels of popular accountability. The expansion of global democracy hit its high point with the end of the Cold War in 1989, when a wave of countries in Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa experienced their first democratic elections. In the 1990s, Francis Fukuyama's famous claim that history was coming to an end, and that it was only a matter of time before all of the world's countries became liberal democracies, seemed to have some purchase. Now, the first 2 decades of the 21st century have seen the 9/11 attacks in New York City, the massive economic meltdown of 2007-2008, the never-ending war in Syria, and mass migrations. In addition to these events, traumatic events, since the 1980s, the economic conditions of the middle classes have stagnated and even declined across much of the world, as technological advances and globalization have created economic growth, but also increased levels of economic inequality. This combination of economic insecurity and global trauma has presented a unique challenge to democracy. It has led to an increasing openness to leaders whose rhetoric and even behavior often violates key democratic norms. Interestingly, these leaders claim to be making politics more accountable to the needs of everyday people, and to be draining the swamp of a corrupt elite. At the same time, they threaten and sometimes imprison journalists and the political opposition. They believe that high levels of accountability trump pluralism, and that if you have the support of enough people, there's really no need to recognize the civil liberties of those who don't support you. The rise of these types of attitudes and leaders begs the question: have we seen the end of the delicate balance between accountability and pluralism achieved in the late 20th century? Can this balance be restored given the increasing economic inequality associated with advanced capitalism? Or will we see an ever-increasing tension between populist and pluralist visions of democracy, as described in the above stories from Catalonia and America? I, for one, continue to think that democracy is the best game in town, and is also the best system for adapting public policy to the world's new economic challenges. However, in an age of social media echo chambers, it's easy to get caught on one side of the pluralism-accountability divide, and to demonize those with competing opinions. Polarization is a real threat and has caused democratic breakdowns in the past. One key step in restoring the balance between pluralism and accountability in the 21st century is thus getting off of our cell phones and into our communities. The more we talk to those with different opinions, the more we'll see that neither pluralism nor accountability functions well on its own, and that, indeed, they need one another to flourish in unison.